Hey you guys, I am super excited about today's video. Today I've decided to talk about your voice and how your voice works. I think I'm gonna do two parts this week. I'm gonna do the first part about how your voice works, and the second is going to be about the aging voice, which is something I talk about a lot in clinic and end up explaining. So I'm gonna talk in this video though, in general, about your larynx, your voice box, how your voice gets generated, and maybe we'll look at some pictures so we understand the mechanics of the sound production. And then I'll talk a little bit about the ways in which our voice goes bad, the things that make our voice sound different or wrong, and about how those things sound different and how they look different. And then maybe a little bit about what you should do if you have a voice problem. And then if you have an aging voice, you can check out the second video today about the aging voice. So this is one of my favorite topics. I really love the human voice. I like listening to different people's voices. Sorry friends, but if you're talking to me, I'm listening to your voice. I'm kind of thinking about it on the side, the same way some people might, look at your eyebrows or something like that. I really think it's a cool little machine, and I'd love to explain it to you. So we'll get started with that. First thing I want to talk about, is the mechanics of sound. So what sound is a compressed wave of air. Right? So it's a little strange, like a compressed wave of air could just be me flapping my hand, but that isn't really a sound because our ears don't pick it up, right? So our ears pick up a certain narrow range of compressed airwaves, and that's all sound really is. So when sound gets made by our larynx, it's with a frequency that's very, very fast. So the way that our larynx makes sound is it chops the sound up into little tiny airwaves. Okay, chops the air up into little tiny compressed waves that then go out through the air and hit our eardrum. Okay, that's how all sound gets created. But for our larynx, the way it does it is actually with our vocal cords. So I know you've heard of vocal cords. I always kind of wonder what people imagine when they hear that word. But what your vocal cords are two little bands of tissue. They're actually made out of an elastic core that's actually almost like a piece of elastic with a covering over them that vibrates and slides. You can imagine it like a string on an instrument, and that the tighter you pull it, the higher the pitch gets because the frequency becomes faster when you pluck it. So I have a rubber band to demonstrate this. So when you pull the vocal cord with the muscles of your throat, when you pull it tight and you sort of pluck it with the air, it makes a high sound. But if it's less long, it makes a lower sound. So that's the same as on a guitar or on a violin. And the vocal cords are a paired structure. Here, I'll show you a quick picture. Now this is actually a picture of a human larynx. It's actually mine. I took a picture of myself when I was doing some diagnostics on one of our machines the other day. So patient gives permission for you to see her larynx. So this picture is generated with a little camera that I put in the back of the mouth. It actually doesn't go down your throat at all. It just kind of like hovers up around your uvula and looks straight down. It's a 90-degree camera. So we're looking straight down my throat in this picture. This is the left side over here. So it's as if you were to stick your head like right in my throat and look down. So what we're looking at is the voice box itself, okay, or the larynx. It's actually not a box. It's more like a triangular shaped structure. And inside it is the vocal cords. So these two white things here are the vocal cords right here. Okay, there's two of them. They're white, kind of like your eyeballs, the whites of your eyes when they're normal. And right now I'm breathing in. So my vocal cords are apart. And this black space is the hole going down to my trachea where the air is going down into my lungs when I breathe in. Some interesting anatomy. These little bumps are normal. They're actually the little cartilages that open and close the vocal folds. They swivel like a hinge. And this big guy here, that's actually my epiglottis, which is like a little trash can lid that folds over the airway part of the larynx so that food can go down the back into the esophagus when I swallow. So when the vocal folds hang out like this when we're just breathing, but when we go to make a sound, they shut. They meet each other right in the middle, as seen in this picture here. So this is a picture of me saying E, and my vocal folds are completely touching each other. And at this time, what you can't see, because this is just a still photo, is that they're actually vibrating at thousands of times per second to create the sound of my voice. So the way that works is, when I go to make a sound, I close my vocal cords, I push them together, I have air in my lungs, I push the air up from my lungs, and that forces my vocal folds apart. Like a flap, forces them apart, and then they snap back together, and then I'm still speaking E and pushing that air up, and it flaps again, and it snaps together, and it flaps and snaps, and thousands of times per second, the snapping noise makes the sound of our voice, E. And again, the tighter I pull that vocal cord, the higher the pitch gets. So when I pull it tight, E flaps quickly. When I pull it a little less tight, E, it flaps more slowly. So that's actually how the voice works. It turns out that the only thing our larynx does is make a sound. E. The rest of our voice, the creation of the vowels and the consonants in our speech, is actually done by the muscles of our throat and our mouth. So the vowels get done by changes in the throat. I, E, A, O, U. They make different shapes of our throat that change that the harmonics of that what's generated by our voice box into different vowels, and then our palate, teeth, and tongue and lips create all of our consonants. Pa, ta, ka, la, ga. That's things that we do with our mouth. So if people come in and say, well, my partner's speaking funny, everything sounds garbled when they talk, that's something that isn't a problem with the voice box. It's a problem with the tongue or some of the musculature of the mouth or throat. So that's how we make our voice. So if we think about the elements that go into making the voice, so voice generation, the power happens from our lungs. We need a lot of air in our lungs to create the power for our breath, okay? The vocal folds, in order to make the voice, they need to close tightly so the air doesn't escape through the vocal folds so they can generate a nice vibrational pattern, right? So anything that's wrong with the lungs, like if people can't generate enough power from their lungs, their voice can get weak and tired. If the vocal cords can't close properly, then air will escape and it will be hard to create a good vibration. Also, people will get fatigued quickly because they'll talk like one sentence and then they'll have to get more air and then they have to breathe again. So air escape can be a big problem. Now, air escape can be caused by two different things. Number one, by vocal folds being unable to close all the way, maybe because one of them is weak from an injury, say a vocal cord injury or injury to the nerve to the vocal cord, or because there's a lesion on the vocal cord, like a little mass or nodule or something, that's interfering with a full closure of the vocal cord. So the vocal fold has to be able to close. It has to have sound, it has to have air vibration, air pushing up under it. It has to be able to close. And thirdly, it has to be able to vibrate. So anything that's going to interfere or change vocal fold vibration, the ability of that string to vibrate, is also going to change the sound of your voice. Well, what are some things that could do that? So anytime the vocal fold is a little bit swollen, for instance, we all experience this if we overspeak, like say we yell at a football game and the next day we're like, oh my gosh, like, what did I do? You know, I can't really talk, I'm hoarse the next day. Well, that's just from your vocal fold being beat up all day from your screaming. And then the next day it's kind of swollen and it's no longer like a rubber band, it's more like a hot dog and it can't really vibrate, right? So anything that's going to thicken the vocal fold or injured in any way, chronic voice injury, things like silent reflux, which will irritate the vocal fold and make it not vibrate normally. A lot of coughing, of course, is a very common cause of hoarseness, again, because the vocal fold gets beat up. So anything that's going to interfere with that vibratory quality of the vocal fold is going to make it more difficult for you to speak. And the fourth thing, and I think the most interesting actually, of the things that'll interfere with how your voice sounds is just the muscles that go into speech production in the first place. So sometimes people will come in with problems that are just related to how they're using their voice. For instance, if they carry a lot of tension in their voice might sound really pressed like this, and it'll become exhausted. And when you actually look at the video of their laryngeal use, you'll see that the muscles are like super tight, almost like I'm holding tension in my shoulders all the time. And the treatment is just to help the patient learn how to relax, sometimes even massage their larynx to get it to work more normally. So the big categories of problems that come into the larynx are air production, closure, vibration, and function. And interestingly, all of those things can sound like different types of hoarseness. So I'm just going to kind of close this shorter video with the idea that sometimes you can even hear the problem with the larynx by listening to it. So for instance, somebody who has a sort of like a weak powerhouse might have a very sort of weak and soft voice and have trouble generating. This sometimes happens to older people because their vital capacity of their lungs just sort of shrinks over time. Sometimes you can hear the lack of closure. So someone with a vocal fold injury, I'll try to imitate, will have like a breathy voice, like they won't be able to generate any kind of power. It sounds like air is escaping, coming out all the time, like breathiness. People with vocal nodules, which also get in the way of closure, sound really specific. Actually, someone like Rachel Ray, if you're familiar with her voice, is a very nodule sounding voice, that kind of husky voice. And then smokers who often have vocal fold polyps, they have a particular voice that sounds a little bit like Marge's sister on The Simpsons. Like smoking voice, like that's usually pretty deep and raspy. And that's because of both of the polyps interfere a little with closure, but also polyps give the vocal cord a different vibrational property. So, and then finally, people with functional problems, as I alluded to earlier, may have a pressed voice or a vocal function that changes rapidly. So in 1 minute, they may sound normal, and the next minute, they're having trouble getting their voice out like this. And you know that it's functional because the muscles are doing different things at different times. And if it was just an anatomic problem, it would be there every time they spoke in the same extent. So that's my little rundown on how the voice works, and it's a foundation for other videos that I'll make about specific voice problems. In the end, I want to just say that if you do have a voice problem that's lasted longer than a couple weeks and you don't really know the reason, you probably should see an ENT and just let us look. It's very easy to look at the vocal folds in the office. We use a tiny scope that goes in your nose. It's several millimeters in diameter, so it's plenty of room for it. And it's a little weird and uncomfortable, but people do great with it. And, it's a picture's worth 1,000 words. It's always just good to get a look down there and just make sure there's nothing either, worrisome or that, maybe we can fix. So, I don't want to make people anxious and make you run into the doctor, but it is a good idea if it's been several weeks and you really don't have a cause, just to let one of us look. We won't bite you. Okay. All right. Well, I'll see you next week. And if you want to stay around and hear about the aging voice, I'm posting another one soon. Bye.